All right, so here's the story. I just picked up this car, and honestly, what you see is what you get. At first glance, it's a bit rough. You can't really tell much about it. But hey, once you buy something like this, you know it comes with surprises. Most people would probably pass on it, but I saw potential. It's been sitting in a garage probably for years, but not in the best way. They left it outside under the blazing sun for who knows how long. No cover, no care, no insurance, just out there, soaking up every bit of weather. The paint's not great, and honestly, the more I tried to clean it up, the worse it looked. At one point I even thought, did I just get scammed? But well, that's part of the adventure, right? The car itself isn't bad though. It's got some charm to it. I mean, the back's a bit worn, and get this, the door? You have to crank it open by hand. Like really? A hand crank? When was the last time you saw something like that? I tried to start it, but of course, there's no battery in it. So I decided to give it a shot anyway. Opened the door, turned the key, and all I got was a sad little click, click. It's like it wanted to start, but also didn't. The engine was trying, sputtering, but no luck. I gave it a few more tries, but every time it just got slower. It's definitely going to need some work. Oh, and the original paint job? It used to be white with a red hood, but now it's just, let's say, faded. Right now, the engine doesn't even respond. So I asked the guy selling it, "What's your price?" Threw out a low ball, $8,000. He laughed and came back with, "It's worth over 10." We went back and forth a bit, but honestly, I wasn't looking to fight over a few bucks. I told him, "Look, if we can keep it close to 10, we'll call it a deal." He was game, and we settled at 9,500. I mean, come on for something like this. That's fair. Of course, I had to factor in the towing. The car's not moving on its own anytime soon, so I spent an extra 500 to get it home. But you know what? Even if it had cost me the full 10, I wouldn't have minded. I was already committed. The way I see it, this is part of the fun. You take a gamble, and then you turn it into something great. So yeah, this little Mitsubishi, what they call the little treasure, is finally mine. I can't wait to get it cleaned up, fixed, and maybe even restored to its former glory. I'm thinking about putting it on the channel. People love seeing these old school gems brought back to life, don't they? All in all, 9,500 bucks, and I've got myself a solid project. Here's to giving this vintage beauty a second chance at life. All right, here's what happened. I got this car and it came with this aftermarket spoiler attached to the back. First thing I'm gonna do when I get home? Take it off. The frame's a bit rough around the edges, sure, but it's workable. At 9,500 yuan, it feels like a good deal. I'm planning to clean it up a bit. Should turn out pretty nice. The car was still sitting at the lot, practically untouched. Pretty cool for an old ride, right? Once I get it home, it's just a quick clean, a little polish, and we're good to go. So I had it transported home, cost me an extra 500 yuan, but now it's safely parked in my driveway. This Mitsubishi little treasure doesn't seem to have major engine issues, at least from what I can tell. The first thing I need to do is disconnect the fuel line, hook up a battery, and see if it'll start. I've got to remove the fuel hose to prevent dirty fuel from spilling everywhere. The battery compartment, completely rusted. I'll have to loosen it up and clean it thoroughly. To avoid dirty oil getting into the engine, I'll use an empty plastic bottle to seal the fuel line properly. Then, I'll tighten the battery's positive and negative terminals. Honestly, this kind of work gets messy fast, so I'll stop here for now. The battery's in place, and there's a key with the car, though it doesn't look original. Let's see if it works. I noticed the display flickered for a second, and lo and behold, the headlights came on for a moment. That's a good sign. Check out these headlights. They've got such a vintage charm. But the ignition key? No luck. I turned it all the way, but nothing happened. Tried again. Still no response. Typical old car stuff, right? It's probably the wiring or something with the electrical system. From what I can tell, this car has a main power switch and an additional starter switch. When I flipped the main switch, I saw some reaction from the controller. That's promising. Cars like this, though, aren't about how they drive. It's about making sure they're ready to go after sitting idle for so long. The real issue is usually the wiring or maybe a blown fuse. Either way, this little Mitsubishi is a fun project, and I'm ready to dig in. All right, so I went through everything, checked it all out, and there doesn't seem to be any major issue at first glance. But I have a strong suspicion that the starter motor is the problem. The engine bay is a mess, caked with dust and sticky grease everywhere. First things first, let's take a look at the fuses in the starter motor to make sure everything's in order. The wiring and fuse setup in this car is surprisingly well designed, and the starter motor is positioned in a pretty convenient spot. Still, I had to remove all the pipes and hoses around it because the grime and dirt were everywhere. I didn't want to end up covered in dust while working. Look at how tight this space is. But once the pipes were out, I was able to get the starter motor out. Finally, it's free. As expected, it looks like the starter motor was rusted solid. After a bit of effort, I managed to remove it, and luckily, the issue doesn't seem too serious. Let's hook up the battery and give it a try to see what's going on. I disconnected the wires to check if the problem was in the wiring or the motor itself. Time to jump start it and see. Connected the wires, gave it a little test with a small wire to see if it sparks. Gotta admit, I was a bit nervous. My hands were shaking. But there it is, we got a reaction. Let's try again. Yep, no problem with the motor. It's responding just fine. So the issue must be with the wiring. I went ahead and examined the wiring more closely. It's possible one of the connections came loose when I was removing things earlier. I added a bit of grease at one spot to ensure a solid connection and tighten the positive terminal. Without that, a loose connection can cause issues. I tried starting the car again to see if the motor would turn. And yes, it's turning now. Let's give it another shot. Perfect. The engine is turning over just fine. The root of the problem turned out to be a tiny loose wire. After sanding it down and fixing the connection, the car started right up. It's amazing how something so small, like a loose wire, can keep a car from starting. Once everything was secured, I reassembled it, polished it up a little, and the car's good to go. Sometimes cars that have been sitting idle for a long time develop little issues like this. It's not about big mechanical failures. It's just wear and tear over time. But with a bit of attention and care, even these older cars can be brought back to life. Problem solved, and the car is ready for its next adventure. All right, let's get started by reinstalling the battery. It's all hooked up and secured now, ready to go. I slid it back into place, making sure everything was lined up properly. No issues so far. Now let's see what happens when we turn the key. Step on the gas a bit and give it a try. You know, when you've worked on cars long enough, you develop a sense for these things. This one feels like it's close, like it's just waiting for the right nudge to come alive. Let's try again. It's turning over, but the ignition still isn't as smooth as it should be. At least the battery's working. There's power going through. The next logical step is to check the spark plugs. If they're in good shape, then we might be looking at a fuel issue instead. Let's start by pulling the spark plugs and taking a close look at each one. We'll go step by step until we figure it out. Ah, look at that. There are definite signs of ignition. This is why it's so important to run these older cars regularly. Let them sit too long, and they develop all kinds of quirks and problems. Now back to the spark plugs. These things are completely covered in carbon buildup. No wonder it's struggling to start. I'll grab some replacements, clean out the sockets, and install a fresh set of spark plugs. That should clear up at least part of the issue. Once the new plugs are in, we'll test it again and see if it makes a difference. Next up, we need to check the oil pressure. This step is critical because low or no pressure could signal a much bigger problem. Carefully testing now, and there's no resistance at all. Yep, that's a red flag. No pressure means there's something blocking or disrupting the flow. Let's take it slow and methodically. I'll check underneath the car to see if there's anything obvious causing the issue. Still nothing. This is getting interesting. There's definitely more going on here. Before going further, I'll add a little fuel to make sure everything is primed properly. With that done, it's time to try starting it again. All right, moment of truth. Turn the key and it's getting there. There's definite improvement. Sometimes these old cars just need a bit of encouragement. Let's give it one more try. Success. It's running now, though still a little rough. That's the thing about projects like this. It's all about patience. When you take the time to go through every connection, every part, and every system, you can almost always figure out the problem. Whether it's a loose wire, carbon buildup, or even something as simple as an old spark plug, these little things can bring the whole system to a stop. With everything checked and tightened, this car is one step closer to being road ready. It's a process, sure, but that's part of the fun. Every little victory, like hearing the engine turn over, is a reminder of why I love working on cars. They may be old, but with a bit of care and effort, they've still got life in them. This Mitsubishi... All right, let's see what happens when we try to start it. Give it some gas. There we go. It's showing some pressure. Honestly, this thing has been so loose, no wonder it's acting up. But now, we've got pressure and the oil looks fine. Let's try starting it again. Slowly press the gas pedal and give it another go. The oil is circulating now, just ease into it. That's the thing with older cars. They always have a surprise or two in store. Look at that. It's working like it should. That's the magic of a little patience and effort when working on these machines. Next, we'll need to clean up the brakes and make sure everything is working smoothly. Just a quick adjustment to get the car running properly again. Earlier, the brakes felt a bit loose, but it's nothing a quick fix can't solve. Step by step, we're getting this car back to life. Look at this beauty, a Mitsubishi from the 90s, and it's already showing progress. The next big task is changing the engine oil. The old oil is filthy. It's long overdue for a replacement. We'll flush it out and add fresh oil, along with replacing the coolant and antifreeze. Cleaning up the whole system is a must. Once it's done, this car will be ready for a test drive. After heating up the engine and replacing all the fluids, including coolant and oil, it's time to see if it runs smoothly. The internals of the engine have also been cleaned, and we've replaced the brake fluid and clutch pump fluid. Let's try shifting gears. It's not going into gear smoothly. Let's try again. Still no luck. It looks like there's an issue with the clutch. When testing the brakes, they seem fine, but the clutch feels too soft. That's not ideal. The problem might be with the master cylinder or the slave cylinder in the clutch system. After inspecting both, it seems there's no fluid leakage, but the brake pressure doesn't feel strong enough. It's time to adjust the slave cylinder. A lot of the parts are rusted, so we'll have to loosen them carefully. The next step is adjusting the travel on the slave cylinder. We'll remove the cylinder head, tighten the bolts, and extend the travel slightly. Once everything is reassembled, it seems to be working well now. Let's test it again, tighten a bit more, adjust where needed, and it's good to go. Finally, everything's back in place and functioning as it should. With a little more tweaking and testing, this car will be road ready. That's the beauty of working on older cars. Every challenge is worth it when you see it come back to life. All right, let's put everything back together. The clutch has been adjusted, and all the parts are reassembled and secured. It's time to test it out and see how it runs. Let's try shifting into first gear. There it goes, smooth as can be. Let's give it a little run forward. Perfect, it feels just right. Everything seems to be working as it should now. Next, we'll start the engine again and test the clutch. Press the pedal. Yeah, you can feel it working. Now let's try putting it into reverse. Hey, that works too. Smooth transition, no hiccups. This is going great so far. Now it's time to give this car the cleaning it deserves. After a good wash, this red beauty is looking absolutely stunning. To give it a finishing touch, I decided to add a Kojinway luxury car diffuser inside. It's an elegant little accessory that uses natural plant-extracted essential oils, so it's completely safe for everyone, including kids and older folks. The best part, it's incredibly easy to use. You just unscrew the cap, remove the thin protective seal, screw the cap back on, and place it somewhere secure inside the car. A light, refreshing scent fills the cabin, giving the car a clean and sophisticated vibe. It's a small touch, but it really makes a difference. After days of hard work and adjustments, this 90s Mitsubishi has finally come back to life. The engine is running smoother than ever, and all the systems are functioning properly. Now it's ready to move into my personal garage, a space I've been designing specifically to house and showcase classic cars.